Hello, I'm Carl Stabe, and today I have Dr. Mikel Daniels. He's the president of We Treat Feet Podiatry. Thank you so much. I got through that intro. I appreciate you being here.
No, it's my pleasure. It's nice to spend a few minutes talking to you today.
Yeah. Before we even started, you already started giving some nuggets, and I was like, okay, we got to record this because I am big into feedback. As we talked about, like I think customer feedback is so important. Employee feedback, and I know you have 50 plus employees. Before we get to the employee part, let's start with customer feedback. What type of system do you have in place? And give me some of the things that aren't working well and some of the things that do work well.
So we have, on occasion, we try to at least once a year, sometimes more, send out patient surveys, mostly via email, through one of the services, Mailchimp or Constant Contact, for example. And we're lucky if we have a 2% reply rate. Sometimes I wish I could have a 2% high reply rate. But there's this whole back system that we have to deal with that we have no control over, and that is Google and Yelp ratings and all of these people who can go online and basically anonymously complain. When we get a complaint letter from a patient, or even once in a while from a Better Business Bureau issue, I'm surprised at how much it has nothing to do with the patient care. It's patient messaging. They left a message and didn't get a call back, or the person on the phone was rude, or our front desk person didn't say hello when they entered the office. We've had people complain that they never see the same employee twice in our office, which I always find is funny because they have been the same employee twice, but people chameleonize themselves these days with haircuts and hats and all kinds of things to express themselves. So sometimes they look different. Um, but I find that people are generally much more willing to criticize than to praise. It takes effort to praise, but it's
Mm.
helpful to criticize because if you're mad and sometimes just blowing off steam makes a difference. We try to address with patients anytime there's a problem. So if somebody sends us a letter or somebody sends us an email or we get a complaint, we always try contacting the patient. Nowadays nobody answers their phones, so sometimes it's very, very difficult to even get in touch with them to try to relay them. If it's a conflict, they just didn't get along with their doctor or their doctor didn't provide them, the care that they want. We're fortunate that we have, multiple doctors in our practice, so we're able to kind of sometimes, would you like to see somebody else? That usually means me. So I'm the one who has to smooth over the the ruffled feathers when they happen. I'd like to think that after 25 years of practice here, I've kind of learned how to speak to people. But every once in a while,
Mm.
someone doesn't like me either. So
And
I
they
was
probably don't
told.
like anybody at that point, but
Probably not. And I was told, I'm like, I've done, 10,000 surgeries in my career. So, one person who's not happy, it's really not me. So I try, but you take it very personally. And I'm somebody who, doesn't sleep at night well when I'm, worried about something because, I strive every day to do everything to the absolute best of my ability. And, even if I do and people do well, sometimes it's still a failure. And I don't think any of us like failure, but we do try to make sure that we answer all of our feedback. We have people who will send us messages on LinkedIn, and that's a problem in medicine too, because if they send us a Facebook post or something, we can't really acknowledge anything on social media. It becomes a HIPAA violation. So the
Mm.
only thing we can say is, please contact our office to discuss, because we can't even acknowledge that they're an actual patient. So we're sorry you didn't have a good experience. Acknowledges that they're a patient, and you can, in theory, get in trouble for that. So it's very difficult sometimes to reach people, especially with the dark corners of the internet where people like to hide and tell you bad things but don't want to help you improve them. So
Mm.
that's kind of where we are with that.
So that's a difficult system. One, because you have HIPAA, and two, the people you're trying to contact have had issues. And like you said, sometimes it's just they're grumpy and they want to vent, and that doesn't help you in your practice, but it does, cause some issues. And trying to get them actually on the phone or in person is really hard. So I'm curious, like when you do, I guess, respond, or you do actually talk with them, what do you do with that information then?
Well, first thing, to be completely clear, it's not usually me. It's usually, one of our admin level staff who handles that. I have gotten on the phone with patients who have had issues at some point, and I have had patients that would only speak to me. But generally, it's fairly a high level issue when they get to me, because most of the things that they have problems with, I can't fix. I got to put them on the phone with people who can fix them. When
Mm,
it's a staff issue, I deal with the physician staff, but I don't hire and fire the front desk people and the medical assistants and the billers and those sort of people. People call and they complain about their bills all the time, and my only response to that is write your congressman. I didn't make these rules. Believe me, I think they're dumb too. This is how they tell me I have to do it. And oh, you billed $85 for my toenail cut. I'm like, yeah, but we got paid 41. It doesn't matter. I could bill $1 million. They're still only going to pay me the $41. It doesn't matter what I build out. So, and people sometimes don't understand that. There's this whole kind of misperception that, oh, the doctors are milking the system. And, uh, the truth is depending on who you ask, only between 9 and 17 cents of every dollar Medicare spends actually goes to doctors. The rest of it goes
mm,
to hospitals and drug companies and medical equipment companies and the whole nine yards. So doctors are not really the problem when it comes to medicine and billing. We're all just trying to
mm,
help.
yeah. Okay, so that leads me to team communication and employee feedback and some of the systems you have in place there. Uh, what type of system do you have around employee feedback? And then we'll go into communication systems.
So depending on what level they are in our chain will depend on how much they have, regular meetings. We do yearly physician evaluations with all of our physicians, and we will fill out, a standardized form. We usually ask them to fill it out too, and then we sit down with them and that we talk about any discrepancies. Um, it got to be a real problem about 2 years ago because doctors sometimes. Um, Tend to, I don't want to say joke around, but tend to not be as receptive for people, and we start getting chat GTP answers, and you can pretty much tell that they are. And we're like, well, we want to know what you think, not what chat GTP thinks. Oh, you do that, huh? I'm like, well, yeah, it's pretty easy to see. They definitely have patterns when they write. So we sit down and do that. We handle complaints. Fortunately, there's not a lot of them, so we handle some complaints on an interim basis. We had a problem today where a patient one of my partners saw yesterday was really the severity of the condition was not diagnosed correctly, and it created a big problem today. But he wasn't the first one. One of our surgical colleagues 2 days before had come to the same conclusion. And those are the cases that are those are the cases that are ugly, that are something we won't discuss here because I don't think your listeners want to hear the gore of my job. But those sort of things will get addressed fairly quickly. And we as a physician staff meet quarterly. We try to get into the same room, but because our geographic diversity has grown, we go up into central Pennsylvania and then down all the way to Washington, D.C., and then all the way up into Western Maryland. It's really hard to get everybody because some people have to travel up to 2 hours to get to a meeting. And we learned over the pandemic, Zoom meetings are just not effective. People don't pay attention. They don't put their cameras on. You ask them if you have anything to say. It takes them 20 seconds to hit, unmute and say, no, I'm good. But they're not. They just didn't really pay attention, or they start talking about something we had covered 20 minutes before, because again, not paying attention. So we have some trouble with that. Fortunately, you are dealing with people who are professionals. They are highly educated people, and we have interpersonal issues like any sort of people. I don't care if you are, the caddy or the golf pro. There are issues that happen in any business. So we try to nip those in the bud. Our staff, we have managerial staff, so it starts with a operations coordinator, VP of operations, and then site coordinators, and then the people down at the office level. They meet independently from the physicians. There's a level of intimidation sometimes when the physicians are in the room. We do try to meet all as a practice once a year. Usually it's during our, a few minutes before our holiday party, just to kind of get everybody's sense and everything else. It's my opportunity to say thank you. I usually give out handwritten notes and holiday gifts, at that time. But as a general rule, they meet quarterly as well. And we have some staff that doesn't live in this area. We have operations people that are out in Michigan who are never traveling here to Maryland for our meetings, so they are always on Zoom. So but they kind of they handle their own. It's kind of like the student council handling the problems before the administration gets involved. And
Mm.
fortunately, there isn't that much that rises to the level of the physicians. And probably 95% of the stuff that does really just rises to me anyway, because I have to make the final call.
Mm. So, okay, so as you're running this business, this practice, there's a lot. You're right. It's a people-centered business, and there's egos. There's you have to give feedback. How do you how do you create that culture where feedback is embraced and not just ignored or discounted?
Oh, I would love to tell you our system is pristine and works perfectly, but it doesn't. I think one of the things that I've noticed personally is, and I say this, and I always laugh when I say this, but this newer generation, because I still think of myself sometimes as the newer generation, but I'm not anymore. They are far more vocal and far more willing to, do one of two things: either speak out or just
Mm,
quit. They don't
mm,
seem to sit there and quiver or hold things in or hold grudges. The stuff that was fairly routine when I was going through, training and working my way up the ladder. So, we don't have the same kind of problems that we have, especially because most of our support staff tends to be on the younger side, 20 somethings and 30 somethings. And then the ones that are 40 somethings usually have been with us for a while and they've kind of grown with us. So that it's a little easier when have a level of familiarity when they're basically at that point family more so than employees. In the past, we would have trouble because, like any place else, every once in a blue moon, there would be a screaming match between some people. I have been known on occasion to lose my temper too. So, fortunately, everybody knows that I'm the kind of person where, I'll say my piece and then it's over and I'm done. I don't hold grudges. I don't keep bringing it back up. But at the end of the day, I really have two full-time jobs, and one is seeing all my patients, and then number two is running the business side of things. Which again, I try to minimize myself with the daily operation stuff, who's working what hours, and employee reviews for non-physicians, and supply chain issues. I don't really get involved with unless our budgets seem to get out of control, in which case then I become very involved in it.
mm,
Things like that. I'm concerned with the flow of patients in offices to make sure that we're maximizing opportunities for our physicians. Nobody wants a doctor sitting in an office doing nothing. That's counterintuitive and counterproductive at the same time. So those sort of things. And I will tell you, I see 100 to 150 patient visits a week. It's a time-consuming process that
mm,
takes a lot out of you. So I spend my weekends trying to kind of catch up on things. I am amongst my many hats, the chief financial officer, so I pay all the bills.
oh wow, that's a lot.
So well, and again, that's kind of one of those business things that I figured out a long time ago. People who have access to your money will steal it. People
Mm,
that you trust, people that have been there for years. We've had long-term employees we've fired because they stole $20. Can you imagine working someplace for 4 or 5 years and getting fired over $20? Well, once you steal, there's just no trust. And we
yeah.
have very, very confidential information about patients. Aside from their medical histories, we have their name, address, social security number, all kinds of things that are really, really dangerous. So if you can't trust somebody, they can't work for you anymore. And once somebody steals something, the trust is gone. So, no matter how much we've liked them, that's kind of one have been our blanket rule. So, fortunately, nowadays there's like no cash in the office. Everybody pays with credit cards. So, we're really getting away from having that problem. But again, nobody else can take money out of the bank but me.
Mm.
It's just a safety mechanism. And, we've employed that. So, that solves problems. It's, one of these things where 20 years ago we had these problems and now we don't.
Yeah. But that puts more on you, and your stress levels probably increase because of that.
Yes, I said to our nurse, who's also a site manager for us as well, I said, sometimes I wish I could clone myself, except the world couldn't handle two of me.
Yeah, well, they couldn't handle two of me either. I think that's it's a lot, right? And I'm just grateful my wife can put up with me because I am definitely a handful of myself. So
I think that's our job. It comes on the Y chromosome.
Test your wife as often as possible. Test your
Exactly.
patience. Okay, so I like that. So some of the systems I'm hearing: yearly reviews, quarterly reviews, conversations, uh, even the evaluations of non doctors, which I'm guessing, does that mostly fall on your shoulders?
No, the non-physician staff is done by the operations team. They
Okay.
also determine, pay rates and raises within a certain budget. They have to stay within their budget. So, but again, I don't get involved with whether somebody gets, a raise this year or not, or whether they deserve it. We're in Maryland, and it's either 2 or 3 years ago we went to the $15 minimum wage, which was a little bit of a problem because we then had patients, we had people who were now making minimum wage who weren't before. So, they naturally had to slide up the payroll. And, this has all happened in light of, last year we had a 2.8% Medicare fee cut. Medicare's half our practice. So, imagine, 3% of your income or 1.5% of your revenue just drying up out of nowhere for no reason. You're doing the same
Mm,
work. Meanwhile, all the costs are going up at the same time. It's one of the defaults of medicine, and why you're seeing a decline in private practice in medicine. These aspects of business operations are becoming more and more difficult. When I was a student and when I was a resident, back when I operated by candlelight and rode to work on a horse and buggy, the hospitals were run by doctors. Everybody in the admin, were medical people, doctors, nurses, you know. Some types of providers, PTs or whatnot. Nowadays, you got a chief medical officer in most of these systems, and everybody else in the C-suite are business people,
mm,
which is really, really difficult because during the course of my career, at some point I figured I really didn't know what I was talking about and needed some help. So I did an MBA program, and then I realized, boy, I certainly don't know what I'm doing and didn't and need help. But I would go to meetings where it would be C-suite people meeting with physician staff, physician management committees, whatever it was, and screaming matches would erupt, and they weren't talking about the same thing.
mm,
And to sit there and there's nothing funny about two grown adult males yelling at each other at the top of their lungs in a professional setting, but it is comical to think that they're not fighting about the same thing. One of them's arguing about what they're having for dinner while the other one's telling them they jaywalked. I mean,
mm.
it's
The
bizarre to see
communication
it,
just,
and they don't realize they're not having the same argument, and it all revolves around services and fees. Doctors are busy talking about what they need to do for their patients, and the C suites are busy talking about how we get reimbursed for care. Not the same conversation.
yeah. Yeah, you're right. It happens at the same time, but it's a completely different result on either side. Yeah.
Yep. And it's comical if it wasn't just completely sad.
So how do you create systems to catch some of these issues before they become problems? Do you?
Well, I mean, again, I think, and fortunately, being 52 or 53 employees, whatever we are this week, tends to limit the responsibility of that. Like, I can't imagine being the head of 1,000 employee health system with 300 docs and 700 support personnel, because again, there's just so much. In the different levels at that organization, because the C-suite can only do so much. So, my solution, unfortunately, has been if I have a problem, I fix it. I do it. I wish I could delegate more than I do, and I'm working really hard to try to delegate things more. But the second something's not going well, you go and you stick your fat face right back in the problem, and next thing you know, you're doing more about it than delegation didn't seem to do you any good. So
Mm,
that's one of the flaws in my leadership style that I've always tried to work on, is the fact that I'm just too quick to say, never mind, I'll do it myself,
mm,
instead of delegating and, relying on people to do it. And when they don't do it right, relying on them to redo it. Because we also live in a society today where some people honestly can't figure out what's wrong and just keep trying to fake it till they make it. And you can hide in a big organization. You can't really hide in something our size. You
yeah,
can't.
yeah.
It's almost like high school. the rumor mill flies, and everybody thinks they know, and yeah, everybody knows who's dating the cheerleaders, and yeah, it's kind of ugly. So, I used to think I wanted to run a much bigger organization. That's why we grew to this size, and I now have figured out how misguided that was.
Okay, so why do you think that is? Why is that a struggle for you to delegate and then allow them to make that mistake and then try to fix it themselves?
I think that is the way physicians are taught to deal with problems. We're
Mm,
dealt to work with other people, but we're dealt to accept people's expertise for what it is. So, for example, when the cardiologist tells me that this is the cardiac problem, I don't question them. I accept it as rote and I move on. When somebody tells me this is the cheapest price they could get for paper clips, and I go to pickyour.com site and I find paper clips 30% less. Well, what do you do? Did they not find it? Did they not look?
mm.
This creates a whole level of problems because people get comfortable. Oh, I always get it from this vendor, so they told me this was the cheapest. I'm like, well, did you check? Again, now I'm checking, and again,
Yeah.
now I'm just doing the work myself. So
Mhm.
that's kind of how we kind of run into problems, and maybe I could use some more professional help from you as to how to resolve those issues. But
Oh
at the
yeah,
end of the day, you can't fix human nature, and people always navigate to the comfortable. Even if the
it's
comfortable
true.
is wrong, they will
It
navigate there.
Yep. Yeah. Our brains are wired to use as little energy as possible. It's the human condition of like, well, let's store our energy and save it and make sure we have energy for later. But that doesn't help us in the office, right? When it's a simple little couple clicks that you could just look real quick. You're not saving that much energy. You're just being lazy, and then there's a difference.
And then you could have a 60-watt outlet and someone's working with a 20-watt bulb, and then they're
Yeah.
still saving energy. You know? You run into those problems, and it's ironic because obviously in my professional day I spend a lot of time with my patients, some of which are very intelligent, some of which are very socioeconomically challenged, but my colleagues that I talk to about patient care all day long are other professionals. They're physicians, they're physicians
Mhm.
assistants, they're physical therapists. They're people who have high level understanding of the topic at hand and have the same goal that I do, which is to make the patient better. And there's not that much bumping heads because people get on the same page very, very quickly. I see people all the time. We all read the same book. There's
Mhm.
only so much interpretation we can have differently. So that's very, very easy. But when you're dealing with people who don't have the same level of understanding of a subject that you do, and either they're afraid to enter it because they don't know, or they go with this fake it or make it mentality, or worse, they think they're right when they're wrong and they're insistent on it. You
Mhm.
start to really have clashes. And as somebody at the top of the food chain, I realize that at the end of the day I'm going to win any argument, not because I'm right necessarily, although I try very hard not to get into debates where I am not very confident in what's going on. But at the end of the day, I'm the final decision maker anyway. So
Mhm.
arguing with me is not a good thing. I mean, listen, I can be wrong and I can be convinced, and I will sit there and listen to someone's argument. But I have a ton of experience that I fall back on. Just 25 years, I say, of making every expensive mistake in podiatry you can possibly make. I have made it. So, I have this grounding base of it. And I tell people, listen, I know almost everything there is to know about podiatry and practically nothing else.
And running a business, but even that you could probably still grow in some parts of that. Yeah, because
Absolutely.
it's funny when I work with people and develop their systems. There's a lot of misconception of like, oh, it's just going to take so much work, and it's like, well, no, you just start with the most important things first. You don't go crazy, and that's where most people get tripped up as leaders. It's like, well, we have all these things broken. Well, yeah, but you don't start with all of them. You pick the one that's driving the most value for the patient, or in this case, bottom line, right? and like developing systems around that stuff. And I find it fascinating, right? Because this is how my brain works. But I think, even when people hire me, they still don't actually believe that this will actually work because they're like, oh, like, well, yeah, of course there's systems like, these are the systems we have in place. And they're kind of back to your point, like it takes a little bit of energy to change the system, and that's what they're afraid of. But the output on the back end of that is like you save so much time and money down the road. But this is, like anything, to me, if I really break it down, it's habit change. You have to break the habits of the people who are the systems that are currently in place and then rebuild them back up so they're actually and they're supported within those systems. Because back to your point, you can't change the staff, but you can help them find the ways that they will change themselves. And that's when the magic starts happening. Because when they start, and coming back to Kaizen before we hit record, we're talking about constant improvement. When you start putting systems in place that they're finding things to improve, that's when, oh man, it gets a lot of fun at that point. But before we get, I think, too deep into that, I'm curious from an operations perspective, where do you struggle? Because I want to move on to metrics next, because I think this is so hard as a healthcare company, because you have the metrics, but you also have so many other things, laws, you have HIPAA, and you have to balance them all. So go ahead.
I was going to say, so you mentioned Kaizen, and that's one of the things that drives me absolutely crazy. We work really hard to break things down into core activities. And this is how you do something. You do A, you do B, you do C, and you do the same thing over and over again. So, for example, when you stock drawers in treatment rooms, you stock them this way. And I am constantly amazed at how Steph will do it correctly 43 times in a row, and then the 44th time they do it wrong. And I can't figure it out because 43 times in a row it's been fine. Why is it different now? And they don't have an answer when I ask for that. It's the same thing about answering a phone. It's the same thing about filing. It's the same thing about counting stock. We set up these very basic processes that are reproducible, and they will do it right over and over and over until all of a sudden they don't for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something as a small business leader, and I find exceedingly frustrating because I like to do the same thing over and over again. My wife jokes with me because I tend to eat the same foods over and over again. Like, for example, whenever we don't know what to have for dinner, I'm always like, let's make quesadillas. I like quesadillas. They're easy, they're good. We always have
Mm-hmm.
the stuff in the house. I go to quesadilla. My wife is like, I can't eat another quesadilla after 27 years of marriage. I'm going to beat you to death with a quesadilla, and they're soft, so it's going to hurt. It's one of those things. So, and I think that's a personality type, whereas more Type A people are very, very strict in how they do things. And as not being a Type B personality myself, I don't understand how you kind of get through your day without following a process. So
Mm.
I think it's a psychological thing. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, so I can't get any depth in that. But I think that A type people can't understand B type people, and I think B type people either don't understand A type people or so laid back they just don't care. I don't know which one it is.
I think there's many layers to it. There is um, a lack of creativity. I think humans are meant to be creative. So from the psychological standpoint, you have a lot of creativity with when you meet with patients, right? You have to figure out what's going on with them. They often probably don't. So there is this kind of pull, and the brain goes on autopilot. And when the brain goes on autopilot, it stops functioning, stops using that frontal lobe, and they stop making decisions consciously. But the problem with that is they're in la la land, and then they end up not doing those drawers the way they're supposed to. Then I think so. Some of it, to me, it's part of it is a system thing. Part of it is a understanding that that person and working with them and in developing things. But to me, that's where you probably have a lot of leverage to have those people find some creative outlets of finding things that are broken. Because yes, if you just have a checklist or you just have these things, and yes, you did it right 45 times, often the brain will then be like, well, yeah, this is easy. Where's the challenge in this, right? And you're challenged every single probably hour because you're seeing patients, but you're also running a company, but they're not like, and you're like, well, why can't you? You're not even, this is not even a challenge. You should be able to just do this naturally. But then it goes back to that like creativity part. And then I think too is if you have certain things in place from a systematic point of view, certain standards and certain things that they can catch themselves. Because I think too is creating ways for them. And this is just me kind of spitballing systems off the top. If I should I stop? Should I move on? Because I like
No,
this is
no,
where my
I'm enjoying the free consult here. So.
because I what ends up happening is they need to also check themselves and create those loops, those systems for them. Because then at a certain point, then what can happen is they will catch it, but you're training them to catch it themselves and creating those systems for that. The human, it's systems and humans and habits are just so fascinating to me. Because I think too is what you incentivize, right? So if you're incentivizing these people in the proper way, you ever study Charlie Munger?
I mean, I've read some things. I would not call myself a student of Charlie Munger, but I definitely know who he is, and I was sad when he passed because the Charlie-isms were the best,
They were the
best business
best.
advice ever.
So good. Yes. So one of the things he said is show me the incentives and I'll show you the results. And that's another thing coming back to this person. What's the incentive for them to keep doing it correctly in the 46th, 47th time? That's where, like, if it's just like, well, a slap on the hand or a frown, like, oh, you didn't do this correct. That's where incentives really come in and metrics and like KPIs. And KPIs is more of a business term, but just things that people need to be able to keep track of themselves and whether they're doing things well or not. Because I think this is another thing is no one gets appreciated for doing that right for the 46th, 47th time. And I get it. They shouldn't really need a great job on every time they do a drawer, a set of drawers correctly. But like that also then creates that malaise, right? Because it's like, well, no one's really watching. So anyway, I could talk about this all day long. I want to get back to you because I think sorry, did you want to say something?
Well, I just wanted to follow up with everything is transactional. So we have a deal. You stock that drawer correctly, and at the end of the week, I hand you presidential flashcards.
Correct.
Now,
But that is all.
if I'm wrong, you are sure going to be upset with me and come tell me. How come I can't be upset when you're wrong?
No,
Where's the
you
two-way
can
street?
be. You can be. I think that's the thing is you can be, but they need to understand what the standards are and expectations are. And if it's like, hey, if you do this drawers wrong for the third time, you're out. Now we're have a real conversation versus, hey, how come you can't do this correctly? And it's almost feeling like, well, yeah, it's too easy. And there's so many layers to it. And I agree with you. You're right. Like, hey, just I'm paying you for this job to do it well. You figure out how to actually, make it fun or whatever, however you want to look at it. Um, okay, so coming back to metrics and operations. So, like, what is your biggest struggle, right? And then, like, from an operations perspective, and then from your systems perspective, like, do you do you have a way to track that, or a process, or like like, hey, we're having these struggles. These are five things. and we need to work towards these. Do you have a system around that at all?
So I will tell you very basic that my single largest struggle, not only in practice but in life, is time management.
Mm.
There's just not enough hours in the day, and I'm not somebody who sleeps very well. So they make fun of me. I round in the morning at the hospital 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I'm too tired to go. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm ready to go home and veg out on the couch for a couple of hours, because I just, you get to the point where after you've had 25 or 30 conversations with people all day long, you don't want to talk to anybody. You want to go home and
Mm.
watch MASH reruns. So that's my biggest issue is time management, and I feel like I can't ever get enough done. So you can't allocate enough time for a particular activity, because my whole life revolves around 10-minute meetings. Every 10 minutes, it's a new meeting, and it's a new
The
problem. And at the end of
task
the day,
switching,
yeah, you
oh.
you sit there and basically, if to break it down to its core components, people complain to you and you're
Mhm.
expected to have the answer. And again,
Mhm.
I chose this. It's not like this was a surprise to me. I guess, breaking it down that simply probably was, but it's draining. And if you've had friends or relatives who drone on about things sometimes, you can understand. But instead, I have to do it in 10-minute intervals all day long.
Mm.
And that also accounts for one of the good things about podiatry is we're very tactile. I use my hands a lot. I examine people. I use my hands. I treat people. I use instruments. I use my hands. Um, you know, the other thing that's great about podiatry is God gives you something to compare to. You got one on one side and another on the other side. They should be pretty much the same. So that's also simple. But the issue I have is trying to find things to take off of my plate, and I rely very heavily on our VP of operations, nice lady named Kathy, and my wife gets very upset because she'll tell me I need to be somewhere or do something, and I'll say, "Does Kathy know?" Because Kathy kind of makes sure I get where I need to go. And then my wife says she wants her own Kathy. So my wife's a school teacher, and I said, "Well, I don't think that they have those, but you should talk to your union rep." Um, so but I do have people that kind of help push me through my day. And when I have problems, people I turn to, like this emergency that I had today at 5 o'clock in the morning, when I'm trying very carefully not to start calling and waking people up, because I'm up working, but lots of people are not, and I have to have things happen during the course of the day. So send later, the greatest thing ever invented in texting, by the way. I can type out a text and just hit send, like wait till 7 a.m. to send it. But for people to kind of start working on this process. So, for example, this patient was unable to consent for herself. So we had to figure out who could consent for this patient and how to get a
Mm.
hold of them. And then, whether they're in person or whether they're consented over the phone, there's different policies. So I didn't have time to sit there and go through all that. So my staff was able to do that. I did end up speaking to it would turned out to be, a family member for 25 minutes in the middle of my morning, which makes my waiting room look like a bus depot. But it had to get done, and then
Yeah.
come to the hospital and do the emergency that I had to take care of. But I couldn't have done that by myself. And I'm fortunate that I do have some support staff for that purpose. But when it
Mhm.
comes to my personal life, yeah, I don't have that, and my wife makes it very clear that she isn't that. So yeah, and she's come to the conclusion that after 30 years together as a couple, that I'm probably not going to change very much. I'd like to say I changed a lot because I had more hair when we met. But it's one of those things where sometimes I also have difficulty between my work life and my home life, because you get used to saying, "Okay, Kathy, I need this, this, and this," and it gets done, versus at home where it's like, do it yourself.
Which is then a complete shift, right? Because you're like,
Exactly.
I need somebody at home to help me. Well, pretty soon we'll have robots come
Oh,
in
hopefully. And I do try very hard to leave work at work and home at home. And I'm pretty good
yeah,
about leaving home at home. Work at work, it's the tougher part.
yeah, yeah, it
I
is
spend more
for a
time
lot
there
of
anyway.
people. Yeah, yeah. Okay, and I know we're coming up. We got about 14 minutes left. Is there one leader you would like to thank? Who is it, and what did they teach you?
So I've had a couple of people throughout my life who have kind of, given me different things. And, I don't have one particular person, but if I was forced to pick, the person I have to thank was my residency director, a doctor named Ronald Sherman. And he had all kinds of sayings and impressions. And there were times he was not very nice to me when I was a resident. This is 25 years later. But looking back on, one, the opportunity he provided me with, and two, the tools he gave me to get through. I mean, the majority of the way I practice revolves around things that he taught me.
Mm,
And we don't have residents that we teach in our facility anymore, but years ago we did. And I used to say, you should take a little bit of all your attendings and come out a better doctor, because you should take the good parts from all of them, and that will make you better. And I'd like to think that I did. But as I sit back and I think about the things I do these and where the origins or the basis of these things are, they seem to revolve around that gentleman. And he's still kind of trucking away. He's practicing, here in the Baltimore area still. And I encounter him every once in a while, and I always thank him. I'm very appreciative of it. And we were, when I was a resident, I was in my, mid 20s. I wasn't always as kind and probably as respectful as I probably should have been. So I do regret that. But I'd have to say Ron is one of the, the key factors. And then, the other people in life. My grandfather was very important to me as well.
mm.
He was a lawyer in Philadelphia for 50 years. And my wife keeps saying I'm turning into him. Actually, my wife did, because the other day she said I'm turning into her father too. So I think she needs to make up her mind, because it can't be both of them. I'll have to ask her about that.
That's
But
funny.
those sort of people are there. I mean, there are people that I like to read currently that I find Michael Berry to be fascinating, just because
Mm,
he's so far out in left field. Right now, he's screaming that we're in an AI bubble, and everybody's like, "No, that's crazy. Every AI is growing. Everybody's using it. There's more applications." But this is the guy who predicted the housing bubble when
mm,
nobody else did. It's pretty
yep.
amazing to think that way. And he's definitely different. I mean, he's trained as a
Mhm.
physician, but he's definitely different in his thinking. And if you follow him on Twitter, he just puts out these things that make you go, "What?" But he's usually right. So I like to follow him. And I like to. My wife yells at me. I'm from Philadelphia, and in Philadelphia, we yell at the TV like they can hear us. So, like, the nightly news comes on, and she does not want to watch the nightly news because I start yelling at the TV when I disagree with something. And trust me, these days there's a lot to yell at. But it's those sort of things. It goes back to, okay, I yell about it, and I'm done. I'm moving on.
Mhm,
I'm over that
mhm.
problem. But my wife still just hears me yelling about it and doesn't see that it's my way of kind of blowing off steam that way. And I hope the refs can hear me, because some of those calls against the Eagles are just not good.
I'm actually from Philadelphia as well, living in Texas, and I'm an Eagles fan. And yeah, I'm the same way. I'm talking to the TV and yelling at it, but yeah, maybe it is a Philly thing, I guess. I
How
never
about
really
them
thought of it
Cowboys,
that.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm definitely an Eagles fan, and I have my Eagles gear, but people are respectful. They're like, okay,
Are they?
especially
Now,
after this past one. A lot of people would be like, "Well, Eagles never won a Super Bowl." I was like, "Now they've won two, so we're
here's
up and
my
coming."
favorite thing. I tell any of my Cowboys fans, I'm like, nobody currently on the team was alive the last time the Cowboys won a Super Bowl.
Wow. Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
You got
they're
to go
all in
all the
their
way back to
20s and
Troy
30s.
Aikman.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow, that's incredible. I never
That
looked at
is.
it that way.
Yep, that is the way it is. So the Cowboys are professional stinkers, and we've been to two Super Bowls in the last 3 years.
That's funny.
And you wear a
Uh,
Cowboys jersey at the link, you're probably not getting out alive.
Probably. Yeah, I don't know. I never understood that. Why wear if I want to go, I'm just going to go watch my team. Like if I would go up to Dallas, I wouldn't wear Eagles gear. I would just go and watch my team. Anyway, so yeah,
I
it's
live
just
in
not worth it.
Baltimore, so I could tell you stories, but that's for a different conversation.
Um, well, this has been fantastic. I know we're going to do the 5 minute system segment, but before we move on to that, where can people go to find out more about your practice?
Oh, it's easy. It's WeTreatFeetPodiatry.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.